Hello, MedTech Insights enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. I am streaming from a slightly different place today. I had a nice Memorial Day weekend, and we're excited to be bringing this to you. Just as a reminder, when Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting the show, she's running the Massachusetts General Hospital telecardiology program, which is where she is streaming from right now. She sees congenital heart disease patients, and she teaches at the Harvard Medical School. When I'm not hosting the show, I see patients in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist settings. We both support a number of traditional med tech and up-and-coming digital health startups. We both believe that healthcare can be better, both for the clinician and for the patients. You can find both of us giving local, national, and international talks regularly. MedTech Insights is a live, weekly interactive talk show led by me and Ami, where we interview two guest leaders in digital health every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. You can watch us live through the MedTech Insights Facebook page, Ami or my personal Facebook page, the Vanguard.Health YouTube page, or through my personal LinkedIn page. When you tune in live and write comments anywhere below in any of these places, we try to feature you in the show and also incorporate your questions to our guests. We love comments. So when you comment, we love comments, so please don't be shy. All shows are recorded and available after the fact at our website, Vanguard.Health/MedTech Insights. Be sure to keep up with us by joining our mailing list. Look for us linked on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
Great to have you all with us today. So today we get to talk virtual reality and artificial intelligence, one of our favorite topics on this show. We had a great chat about telemedicine last week, and it was really nice to kind of go through the logistics of where telemedicine has come during COVID, but also how it's going to stay and how it's going to be part of the way we provide care. Care delivery models are not going to go back to being all in person, and really shouldn't, because it's best for our patients and the community's health in general for us to be able to reach out to people in the communities where they live. But the next step beyond that is the one that we're very interested in as well, which is what can we do to actually help the delivery of healthcare, to make it easier, better, and perhaps even higher quality and safety than we already have. And so in that vein, we think a lot about what is the use of artificial intelligence? What is the work that can be done, perhaps even better, with some automation, allowing caregivers to really do the intellectual work of taking away those basics and instead saying, what's really happening here? How do I interact with another human? How do I put this in a way that makes sense? Virtual reality is coming along as well, because we think about the number of different things we do right now in healthcare and how steep that learning curve is. And are there ways that we can help both connect with our patients, but even educate ourselves and others about things that may be a rare procedure? We know that doing procedures more often makes us better at something. Can we gamify that? Can we create virtual reality for that? And can our patients better understand their disease by walking inside their body instead of just looking at something on a screen or one of my hand-drawn pictures? You know, one of my goals is to improve my artistic nature. And the reason is I draw things for my patients, and the good news is they laugh. The bad news is they laugh. So, you know, there is something to be said.
To educate them, unclear.
So hopefully virtual reality will, you know, at some point even help poor souls like me. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Just before we start, a quick reminder that Dr. Joe, myself, and our guests are all giving you our own opinions, and they do not represent the opinions of any of the organizations for which we work, are employed, or for whom we consult or advise. And with that in mind, we look forward to audience participation today. Please feel free to write in on social media, wherever you are. We will feature your question and ask those questions of our guests today. Today we have two guests. We have Denise Silber and Kim Shah. First, we'll have Denise Silber join us. She is a digital health pioneer. So an ex-New Yorker in Paris, that's really what I want to be, an ex-New Yorker in Paris who was awarded the French, I know, right? French Legion of Honor. She's an entrepreneur who founded two companies, Basal Strategies, which is when we first had met her, and more recently, VRforHealth. She's also been really the epitome of a networker. She has been able to mentor and sponsor so many people across the globe in being able to better understand and further a lot of the digital health technology that has happened in the past decade or so. So why don't we bring on Denise Silber to start?
Welcome, Denise.
I love that applause.
Denise, so great to have you join us today. Thank you for being with us and taking the time. We realize, how much you have on your plate is amazing to us, and yet you do it with such a grace. So maybe just for the audience to start, the most recent, I guess, is VR4Health, but you have been building your way to this for quite a long time. Would you mind just catching our audience up a little bit on your story and how you got here?
That is an excellent way to put it. Actually, I think I've been building this up since a child, but I'll compress that all into a couple of minutes. Seriously, as a child, I noticed health disparity within my own family. A part of the family, there was a doctor who could take care of a person close to him, and that was my father, and my mother was on the other side of the family. We didn't have access to that uncle, and the healthcare situation was difficult. When I graduated from Harvard Business School, I had an opportunity to go into pharmaceuticals, and there I sort of reconnected with my healthcare self and discovered that there was an issue of quality that came from the diversity of the ways that physicians would approach a same case, whether it was the dosage of the products that I was working on or just even diagnosis. Now, we're speaking over 30 years ago, and maybe things are better now, but still, I know that Dartmouth Atlas still exists. And when in the mid 90s, like in 94, when it was a classmate of mine that introduced our whole class from HBS, the alumni, to the web, I said, oh my goodness, I saw PubMed and thought that this was going to make all of healthcare take a giant leap forward. And then I found out that there were going to be still so many barriers. I had already created another company, a medical advertising agency, and we shifted completely into creating medical websites. And we had to fight about the fact that the average person should be allowed to access this information, and what is quality if it isn't being produced by a professor. Basically, that was the idea. Either it's a medical professor or nobody. I continued working in second medical opinion. I joined a startup that was in the US that still is there called WorldCare, where I did the marketing for second medical opinion, and again found all this resistance. How can a patient possibly ask for a second opinion? Meaning, are they doubting the first opinion? I finally decided that the startup world, that I would be best off doing some consulting on communication. So that's Basal Strategies. Basal Strategies has been promoting for nearly 20 years the proper use of digital health tools. Come rain or come shine, we've been promoting things. And then suddenly in 2016, I was attending Games for Health Europe when I tried on a headset. And this was for phobias. It placed me in a glass elevator. I don't have a phobia of heights, but I could see immediately that I was completely immersed in this high building, going up and down depending on how I moved my head. And I tried another one for rehabilitation, and I thought virtual reality. But it wasn't until, and then maybe I can share here. Yeah, it wasn't until I was attending this conference called Virtual Medicine, run by Professor Spiegel of Cedars-Sinai, in which I was moderating a panel about patients, and they were expressing their testimonies. And I was saying that we must do something. Virtual reality as a therapy is so magnificent. We can't let it take 20 years to become known. That this woman who was in the audience and who was herself a survivor of cancer came up to me afterwards and said, Denise, I heard you. I came here looking for such a project because when I had my chemotherapy, there wasn't anything like this. I had to discover meditation on my own, and meditation is not the same as virtual reality. And as a result, we created VRforHealth.com together. It is original curated content. We have now over 120 videos that reflect the current state of knowledge about the use of virtual reality as a therapy in pain, for anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions, and for physical rehabilitation. There's also a blog, and we have various lectures for professionals. So that is how we got here. Our purpose with VR4Health is to inform patients and professionals about the virtues and challenges of the use of virtual reality. And what I have found is that actually this would reflect a potential whole other way to practice medicine. If you put together all of the different use cases, and there are over 1,300 studies currently on clinicaltrials.gov, you have pain from head to toe. I won't show it now, but there have been videos made of how a patient can approach any sort of painful medical procedure without anesthesia. So even a woman giving birth, it's just amazing.
Such a wonderful, beautiful story, and you're inspiring our audience members. We have Christine Ribick, who is an occupational therapist. She's very interested in virtual reality, and she is working in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and she says that she's using virtual reality in rehabilitation. Thanks, Christine, for sharing, and hope it's really working out. And would love to hear your thoughts on either what Denise is saying or any questions that you have, or how you've used virtual reality. And then Ashvin Pillai, a young physician out of India, says, Denise, a really wonderful story indeed. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, so if you want to see more, I do have a map of where all the trials are happening around the world. And I have if that is of interest.
I think that would be great. And as you're showing that, I'll say I love your story because it comes so natural. We've been talking about origin stories for most of our guests, and the fact that you really had the opportunity to see what healthcare looks like when you have access and understanding and when you don't. And that's
It has been so important through my life. I can just remember when my father couldn't get into a hospital, but my uncle, the professor, would call and he would get him a bed. And as I said, my mother, on the other hand, whose life was probably cut short because I couldn't figure out a way to get her to the right place.
Well, I think this is the story that we hear: healthcare as a privilege rather than healthcare as a right. And that has been the history of healthcare for quite a long time. And so when people say, well, why should patients, your question about second opinion, does a patient have a right to ask a second opinion? That was honestly something that the healthcare industry wondered, right? Does a patient have the right to ask a second opinion? How can they judge us? And we are not that healthcare anymore. That's not who we are. And in fact, we've learned that good health and high quality safe care actually involves the patient being empowered and knowing what they're doing and what their choices are. And we talked about shared decision making, and it's all steps towards the right idea, which is being a partner in your own health and having the right to understand your healthcare, not just receive healthcare. So I love how you've brought that forward.
Yeah, I would like to mention one thing that is so important to me. Within Basal Strategies, we create a lot of events, and we created a brand called Doctors 2.0 and You, meaning the patient and the professional. And we were the first ones in Europe 10 years ago to invite patients to do keynotes. And I had patients, like people with multiple sclerosis and other major diseases, even somebody like you had to hold them up so they could speak at the stand, say to me afterwards, Denise, this was as important as, if not more so than my treatment. The fact that they were being listened to by people like yourselves in the audience, it did a world of good for them, medically speaking.
Definitely. And we have a few viewers. Dr. Bhatt, maybe Kopal Trivedi maybe follows you, knows you. He says, very nice. Thank you for sharing. And then Dr. Joe Heyman. Okay, Joe. Says he is here. He is listening. He is watching. Joe is a good friend. Joe, remind me, he is the president of something of the World Health, not the WHO, but the World Medical Organization. There's a World Medical Organization. So Joe, and he's a local OBGYN physician. Joe, thank you for watching, and let us know if you're using virtual reality for anything.
That's great. Denise, we would love to see what the global picture looks like. And so this is for trials again, Denise? These are virtual reality trials ongoing throughout the globe that you're going to show us. Okay.
So,
and then we have a Dr. John Shu. Great story. Thank you for sharing, Denise.
So I'm going to go full screen. So this, as you can see on the bottom left, as of just a few days ago, 1,300.
Sorry, Denise, it looks like we're having a little bit of difficulty seeing what you're sharing. It's coming through. Oh, there we go.
Wonderful.
And if you could go into full screen.
So I won't go full screen. All right. Okay. So you see here that I find this fascinating that there are 1,319. That's a huge number of trials recorded currently in the clinicaltrials.gov database, and that there are 438 in the U.S. Okay, so the U.S. is leader, but surprise, surprise, Europe is not far behind. And it is surprising that there is less presence elsewhere beyond these two. And within the US, one thing to be careful about is that it's not equally distributed amongst the states. Yes, there's a relation to population, but California really has a lead because of certain academic centers like Cedars-Sinai that I mentioned, and Stanford, but also Hope Memorial is very involved. University of Southern California, so there's several there. Texas, there's a lot in Dallas and Austin. New York State, of course. And I circled because Maryland, which is so small, has 35, but that must have to do with being near Washington.
DC.
Yeah. So, and then I wanted to mention that in Europe, where I live, France is a big leader in trials because there have been a number of startups that have gone over towards the trial centers, investigator centers, and proposed that they join. This is a list of studies in pain. So you can see that there are 268 studies, 165 that are still ongoing, meaning that patients could look to join them. Addiction is wide open. There are very few studies in addiction. If this is an area for any of your audience, they should go right ahead and contribute to more publications for that. On the left here, I think that the clinicians will enjoy seeing, they can take my word for it, that the blood draw and the pre-labor person were really enjoying themselves watching and listening to this VR programs, while the one who was afraid of needles was having a blood draw, and the other one thought that only a few minutes had gone by when it had been 2 hours of labor. And then she had 2 children, one at 2 different births. Also on the right, you see the number of studies. You can see what I was saying, that the largest bit of studies is being done for procedures and then for chronic pain. Burn indication is the people suffering from burns. It's fantastic so that you can change their bandages. And it's good for everything else. And of course, with cancer, you have both for the pain and for the stress and anxiety aspect of it.
Very, very interesting, Denise. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Sorry, our audience.
Yes.
Dr. Heyman corrected me. He's the chair of the associate members of the World Medical Association. Thank you, Dr. Heyman, Joe, for always tuning in and supporting our show. And then Dr. John Shu has an interesting project company. I'm not sure, Dr. Shu maybe will tell us. For clinical research organizations, they're offering the iPill dispenser for secure storage, active control dispensing and destruction of study drugs upon tampering and study. And very interesting. Right. And maybe that should lead us into our next guest. Dr. Bhatt?
I think this is great timing. So I love seeing the global effect of using VR and the interest in AI. It's fantastic. So Kim Shah is the CEO of KnowYourMeds. He started the company after a decade working with Thermo Fisher Scientific as director of marketing for their lab software business. And I will say, I think there is something about people who have started, like both of you, in communications and done marketing and thought about what is it that patients are really looking for from a different perspective, that now come back and say, hey, look, this can be good for both sides of the spectrum. So why don't we bring on Kim Shah to join us now?
Welcome, Kim Shah.
Hi, Hello.
Great to have you with us. Great to have you with us. So maybe if you wouldn't mind telling us, similar to Denise's story, kind of how you started, because you had a long time with Thermo Fisher before you came over and really started Know Your Meds. And my interest, I think that the ability to really take this globally, we were talking about how many VR studies are in India, and I'm of course encouraging people to do more there because I think we can. But you've had great success overseas as well in terms of really equalizing access to understanding one's own healthcare.
Right. Yes. Thank you both for inviting me, and Denise, nice to meet you. So my journey is that, frankly, even while I was at Thermo Fisher, and being of South Asian origin, I have a smorgasbord of friends who are in the healthcare industry, and you almost provided the segue for my talk, because you talked about self-advocacy and being more aware of your own health, and beyond that, being an active participant in your own health. In other words, doing what your doctor tells you, like taking your medicines and following the regimen and keeping track of vitals that might be important, like blood sugar and weight and what have you. And yet we don't, for a variety of reasons, right? Some of us don't fill the prescription that we're given. Some of us, stop taking the medication. We don't read the instructions and what have you. And so our whole sort of belief was that the way to fix this problem was to give the individual timely, personalized, and sort of relevant information, and even perhaps guidance and instructions, while not crossing the border or the line into clinicians, right? I mean, that's your business. We want to do it from an information point of view. So if I may, I'm going to share a very personal story of something that's happening to me right now. So I have a mom in England who's 88 years old. And about a week ago, she essentially was showing symptoms of very severe constipation. And luckily, this being England, a district nurse showed up at the house and performed an enema, and in fact came back the next day and did it again. And then they decided that this wasn't really helping, so they took her to the hospital. And now this was happening in COVID time, so none of us could visit my mom. And she's in a city called Leicester, which is in a further lockdown anyway because of the Indian variant. And so now she's there, she's being treated for this. And about a day and a half later, we finally talked to her on the phone and realized that she was actually very confused mentally. And she basically was talking about stuff like, why isn't dad visiting me in the hospital? And dad had passed away 3 years ago and stuff like that. So we reached out to the doctor and basically said, what's going on here? Our mom was, constipated but rational when she came in. She now appears to be unconstipated but not rational anymore, right? And so something's gone wrong. At the same time, we put the word out in our network of family and friends to see if somebody else could help. And one very quickly came back and said, has anyone checked her sodium levels? And we're like, well, no, why would you do that? And we said, well, just have the doctor do it anyway. And sure enough, her sodium level was really low. And then, of course, I went to Dr. G and found out that, so low sodium levels and mental confusion are quite related. So then they slowly now, and she's still in the hospital because they're slowly bringing her sodium levels back up to the normal level. And thankfully, over the last 24 hours, she's become rational again in terms of conversation. But this was a loved one, but it could very easily have been by me or an individual. And so this whole notion of being aware and sharing information with your doctor is a big deal, right? And the only way you can do this is if somehow this information comes to you more readily than a search engine. Because when any of us go into a search engine, yes, it's helpful, but more often than not, you get 1 million-page results that don't really help you understand. And so that's what Know Your Meds is all about. We encourage users to download the app, put in, the journey basically starts by saying, put in whatever medications you're taking now, because that's perhaps the thing you understand the most as an individual, rather than knowing what diseases you might be living with and so on. And the moment they do that, the app starts to impute, well, you might be a diabetic or hypertension or whatever. We confirm that. And then the moment they enter that information, we then start to say, well, okay, based on this, there are some screenings and regular this and vitals to track and so on that you should be doing, and perhaps side effects to watch out for. And so we're not trying to create hypochondriacs, but at the same time, we are trying to create an awareness that says, because of your condition, and we do this slowly. So it's kind of a, bit by bit, we get them to tell us more about themselves. And we eventually get into asking their family history, because that all plays into perhaps what's happening to you now. So that's really kind of the app. Now, on the other side, and Dr. Joe, you mentioned, or in fact, Dr. Bhatt, you mentioned about overseas. Our goal is to try and bring this globally, right? Because we live in, the medical capital of the world, and it's wonderful in Boston. We have access to everything, but the moment you leave these shores, especially as you go into Asia and my home country of India, skill levels vary all over the place. Healthcare infrastructure is again, varied all over the place. And so what we'd like to do is to bring this interaction between patient and their doctor to be a much more informed level. Not even take for granted that a doctor would actually even know to ask all the right questions to a patient, right? And so on that side, we built a telemedicine platform specifically only for the hospitals. And we're entering kind of AI-driven sort of diagnostic tools on the provider side, so that when a patient calls and says, I have certain symptom or pair of symptoms, the doctor is encouraged to ask all the right questions. Now, this is assuming they have the time to do this, right? But on the other hand, if they don't have the time, it's all the more important that they ask the few key questions as quickly as possible. Right? So that's really what it's all about.
Jen, muted.
Thank you for sharing. And we have Dr. Nevadita Tawari, who says, thank you, Kim, for sharing your personal story. The Wuhan virus has created an immediate need for discussing medical care and delivery throughout the world.
Oh, it's so true. It's interesting as you talk about this, Kim, and we think a little bit about just what's happening abroad. You even mentioned, you couldn't go to Leicester and see mom, partly because it's COVID and partly because, as you mentioned, Indian variants are arriving in Indian populated area there. Right. We were fortunate to host with the American Heart Association a COVID specific session a month ago. In fact, our next one is tonight, but I'll tell about that later. But this is part of the challenge. Is no matter how good a physician you might be, when you have 1 billion people and you have something like COVID ravaging them, or not even that, if before COVID you had heart disease, right, which is burdening, right? 25% of the world's population is South Asian, but 60% of the cardiovascular disease burden lies with those same people. Yeah. How do you manage that much care? And when you look at those ratios, you do need something. You need something that's going to prompt the smartest of physicians or nurses, or anybody who's really trying to provide the right care and say, hey, don't forget, I know this is the middle of a very busy day, but here are a few key triggers that will always come up. And so I think that assistance is really not a replacement for care. It's an ability to give us a little bit of bolstering, to lay that foundation and say, here, we've got you, clinicians. We can give you that little extra you need. And for the patients to say, look, we're coming with something. We're coming with information. And Denise, it sounds like you and Kim overlapped a little bit along your courses in both providing, this kind of idea of the more we can take information and not replace clinical judgment, but say, here are the most common things you need to know about this set of diagnoses. Here's what you can do for yourself. Here's the information that your clinical team might need. You're creating a partner for us that is just that much more of a productive relationship where we don't have to do some of that guidance and we can spend the limited time we have starting at an advanced model. So I love that. Right. So here's a question then for both of you, which is, as we're looking at moving forward in this space and people become more informed, there's still a subset of people who can become more informed, right? There are those who already have some health and digital literacy. And for both of your platforms, they need health and digital literacy. Is that something that you as individuals, companies like yours are thinking about? Is how will we get that health and digital literacy out there? Or do you just make the platform so simple that it's almost foolproof? How does one attack that to get the right people, to get rid of that disparity? Maybe Kim and then Denise, or Denise, you look like you're ready to go. Okay.
Well, for virtual reality, we have to be honest. There is an issue with the cost of the headsets at the moment, but this could change in the next few years, as we saw that if we had been discussing 10, 15 years ago about the mobile phone, it would have been an impossibility as well. And maybe there is something in between what Google was trying to do with cardboard and now. However, I can say from a digital perspective that much has been done recently using pure texting to access people who don't have any of the more sophisticated tools. And it has always been a concern. I've always been in front of this dilemma, which is you don't want to keep the people who could access great things from accessing them because not everybody can. This is true for everything in life.
It's a great point, Denise. We were talking about this. I want to say, yes, Christine, you're right. That is a deterrent in rehab, and it's true. And one thing we talked about, I think last week and the week before, both were there's this concept of a hierarchy. VR is better than video, is better than phone, is better than text. And that's actually not true. We can make any one of those digital health medium, if you will, strong for a population because it is accessible. So I love that concept. Kim, thoughts from you on how you get out there, into our native country and make a change?
It's a great question. My sense, I think, Dr. Bhatt, is that most people don't think about health literacy and so on until they have a problem, right? Or they have somebody, a loved one has a problem. And then the journey begins. It's like, what's going on and why is it happening to me? And all those kind of questions come up. And that's the time, and that's what I meant earlier by sort of timely and personalized information as opposed to sort of academic interest information. So if we can get to a point where we can deliver technology like this at a very low cost, right? And then say to the person, you don't have to tell us everything right away. Let's just start in a very simple kind of way. What's going on with you now? And then we'll peel the layer, of the onion, so to speak, bit by bit. So not to intimidate anybody on both sides, frankly, the patient and the provider, is the way we're approaching this.
That actually makes a lot more sense now that you say it the second time. I really, it is hitting home, right? Yeah. You are not scaring people away by asking for all the information that we could possibly collect at one time, because the 23-page, questionnaire is never well received by anybody. I like that idea of doing it one step at a time.
Last week, Dr. Bhatt, you had Dr. Lee, I think, from Bowie.
We did.
Yes, 2 weeks ago.
The symptom checker and so on. So we have a somewhat similar thought process, but not quite what he's doing. Ours is more around medications, side effects, interactions, and so on, because we're not quite sure whether whatever you're experiencing now is something new, or it could be a side effect of something that you already living with, either a disease condition or a change in your medication, or whatever you missed taking your dose for a couple of days, and so on. So we've kind of scratched that a little bit more, and to say, let me ask you a few questions first about sort of how come you are here, kind of thing, and perhaps it may be just related to literally, like I said, you changed your meds, or you didn't fill your prescription for a week, or you went on the road and something happened, etc. And go past that point before we then say, okay, let's perhaps get into more of a diagnostic question and answer session. And our goal is not to come up with an answer for the patient, but more a way to guide them as to, this is what you should do next. And of course, at the end of the day, the advice is always consult with somebody who knows this stuff, right? A healthcare professional.
Wonderful.
I
We
saw the
have
question.
a great question from Dr. Ashvin Pillai, who follows the show diligently from India. Denise, what is your view about virtual reality and how it can help patients with schizophrenia or more in the psychiatric space, I think is the question.
Well, it's
Great
interesting.
question. Dr.
Yeah, it's a
Pillai.
great question. And it's interesting that he says schizophrenia, because there is a link in that the idea of having multiple persona or personalities can be worked with in virtual reality, because you know that all of these studies about the embodiment concept, where when you are projected into an avatar, you can really believe that it is your legs that are moving, your hand. And there have been studies that show that people with schizophrenia can be helped. However, one cannot make a generality other than my sentence itself, which is a generality, because each patient is going to be so unique. But there are specialists working on this, and the word to look for is embodiment, embodiment therapy, that you embody this other person. And just as a side to that is that, for example, they work on this to change personality, to make people aware of their own racist type of approach, for example, by embodying you in the skin of somebody else.
It's amazing how much more work there is to be done. You know, we started by talking about just the basics of telemedicine and how we started using telephone or video or text, and then talking about algorithms, not even AI per se, right? But just algorithms to help us make sure we're heading in the right direction, either as a patient or a clinician. And then we can layer on some AI to give us kind of diagnostic and direction as to where to go. And then we can turn a little bit and say, you know, just the way we say blended care is going to be in person and is going to be, you know, at a distance, it can also be virtual. And really help us kind of get inside ourselves. And you know, I could have used a sense of 24 hours of labor feeling like 2. So, you know, you reached me there. But I love this. I love this progression. So I guess maybe in closing, as we're coming up on time, maybe from both of you, first Kim, and then Denise will give you kind of last word. Where do you see both yourselves and your companies, because we have some investors out here who I see are watching today with interest, but also the field kind of going next from your perspective? So Kim, where do you think both you, your company, but also the field is headed next? And then Denise, over to you.
So I have to answer the question in 2 ways. I think there's sort of the developed world and the developing world. And I think there's going to be sort of difference in the two. In the developing world, I think these technologies are going to help the provider side perhaps much more than the patient side, in being able to you know, sort of take skill levels from very high to sort of lower levels, and democratize the caregiving to people in rural areas, in tier 2 cities and tier 1 cities, and so on. In the US, I think it's a different story. Here we're focusing our energies more on self-insured employers, whose primary concern is perhaps sort of quality of healthcare, certainly for their employees, but also the cost, because it's an ever-increasing phenomena. And so here, our goal is to actually work with employers to say to them, we will help you kind of keep and analyze and keep a track of your employee population while maintaining privacy, of course, but also then work with you to design programs for specific groups of employees, whether it's diabetics or hypertension or whatever it is, to come up with various both information as well as perhaps even incentive programs to get them to do the right thing for their own health. And so I think to different areas.
That's wonderful. And it's patient empowerment on both ends, developing
Yes.
and developed. So that's great. Denise Silber.
You may or may not have thought about the fact that all of digital health has been dependent on the production of tools, technology classes. If there hadn't been a computer, if there hadn't been the web, if there hadn't been the iPhone developed by Steve Jobs, then healthcare could not have hopped onto it. So with regard to virtual reality, if an Apple or a Google or Oculus, if any of those headset manufacturers come out with something that makes a big leap, in terms of the democratization potential, then this field will not resemble what we're talking about today, which is something that is relatively rare, because there are a number of there are like 100 startups worth being called a startup, developing tools around the world. And I would just like to add, Amy and Jen, boy, if I were living where you are, you'd be my doctors right away. You have such empathy and bedside manner, even though we weren't talking about anything that had to do with personal illness. It's just fantastic. And I really commend you for being two women doctors out there doing all of this.
Well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you. We are so grateful to have both of you on the show today. This is really, an expanding field. I will say you heard it here first. Denise Silber is saying that we need that jump, that light year jump that's going to take VR and put it in the hands of everybody, just like Kim Shah was saying. And then, the cell phone appeared in India and everything changed. So I think it's coming. I think you're right. And I'm excited for it.
We had Hershey, Pennsylvania calling in saying they're using it in rehab. I mean,
yep.
Hershey is not classically a large city. So, okay. So that's very, very commendable.
Town.
Okay.
I will tell you, I think I saw, 4 trials, kind of probably based out of Moscow, I would assume, although I'm sure it could be in Novosibirsk or other places, but we have been in contact with a palliative care group out in Moscow who is really trying to turn the country to using telemedicine for patients. Classically, out of Moscow, there's the healthcare there is provided using telemedicine between doctors and not yet to patients. And there are actually 4 women leaders, physicians who are looking in palliative care to move it. So I think, I see Denise texting on the side, VR for palliative care is great stuff. And so I think there's great opportunity everywhere to take this next step. So with that, let me say my thank yous to everybody. I'm going to put a little shout out there. Our American Heart Association group in Boston has been kind to help us lead over the past year and a half, a series on South Asian heart health. I mention it often, but it is a passion of mine in an area that really does need more patient understanding, education, engagement. And so from 7 to 8 p.m. tonight, the American Heart Association will host another international gathering where we'll talk about doing stents and percutaneous interventions in South Asia. So for those of you who follow me for that, please do join us tonight. And we have just finished the front and back covers for our telemedicine for cardiology book that is coming out with Springer. So more dates soon. More dates soon. But Dr. Joe and many of our other guests have been kind enough to write really striking chapters. The book was planned before COVID hit. You can imagine the fury of change that happened as COVID hit, and everybody said, wait, I want to rewrite my chapter. I can do more now. And so Springer telemedicine. You did. Springer telemedicine. So cardiovascular disease and telemedicine book coming out soon, and grateful to Springer for supporting this and thinking ahead and playing this before COVID. Jen, I will give you last word.
I do just want to, because Christine has been following the show, and she caught my comment about Hershey, Pennsylvania. It is the sweetest place on earth. It is the home of the Hershey chocolate, and I think is there a Hershey Medical School? I don't know, but there is lots of Hershey chocolate throughout, and they use virtual reality and rehabilitation at the Walter Reed Military Medical Center in DC. So that's actually really interesting to know. I am at the VA hospital, so it'll be interesting to see if we start incorporating it into the Boston VA system. And then Dr. Pillai, congrats on our textbook. So I want to say a big thank you to all of our audience for watching. It was the long weekend, at least here in the US. So appreciate you joining us, and really big thank you to our guests and the wonderful work that they have going on. And thank you for joining us. This is MedTech Insights. We are here every Tuesday at 12 noon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.